Have you ever looked at a map and wondered about the places where the ink seems to run dry? Those little dots in the middle of nowhere that don't have a gas station, let alone a future. People call those towns quiet. But if you're stuck in one, you know the truth. They aren't quiet. They're just waiting for the last of the life to be sucked out of them. My name is Elias, and the girl with the permanent scowl and the calloused hands is my sister, Sarah. We weren't placed in a system. We were just left. When our mother walked out of our trailer with a suitcase and a look of pure relief, she didn't call a social worker. She called Old Man Miller. He owned the Scrapyard, the only working well in 10 miles, and a heart made of rusted iron. She traded us for a bus ticket and a promise that he'd keep us busy. For 12 years, Miller kept that promise. We grew up in the grease and the grit of that yard. We learned how to strip an engine before we learned how to drive. We learned that a meal was something you earned by bleeding for it, and that family was just a word people used to make exploitation sound like a favor. Miller thought he was smart. He thought that because we were uneducated and isolated, we were stupid. He thought we were just tools he could use until we broke. But while we were stripping his cars, we were also stripping his life. We were watching where he hid his cash, listening to who he paid off, and waiting for the moment when the weight of his own greed would finally snap the axle. Before I tell you about the night the yard went dark, I want to see who's out there. Comment below and tell me where you're listening from. Are you in a big city? A small town? Are you listening while you work? Let us know. We want to know who's in the dirt with us today. Welcome to Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. This is the story of the Miller debt. The first thing you learn in a scrapyard is that everything has a breaking point. It doesn't matter how strong the steel is. If you apply enough heat and enough pressure for a long enough time, it will fail. I was 9 and Sarah was 7 when Miller moved us into the shack behind the main garage. It didn't have heat and the floor was dirt, but Miller told us we were lucky. He said he was giving us a trade. He said the world didn't owe us a thing, and if we wanted to eat, we had to make ourselves useful. My trade was the heavy lifting. By the time I was 14, my back was maffed with scars from jagged metal, and my hands were so stained with motor oil I forgot what my skin actually looked like. Sarah, her trade was the precision work. She was small, and she could get into the tight spaces of the wrecks, pulling out the copper wiring and the catalytic converters that Miller sold for a premium under the table. Miller sat on his porch every evening, a shotgun across his lap and a bottle of cheap bourbon in his hand, watching us work until the sun went down. "You're lucky I'm a Christian man," he'd shout, his voice like gravel in a blender. "Most folks would have left you to the wolves. You owe me everything, you hear? Everything." We heard him, but we didn't listen. Sarah was the one who started the account, that's what we called it. In the middle of the night, by the light of a single stolen candle, she'd write in an old ledger we found in a 1988 sedan. 2 ounces of copper, 40 cents, she'd whisper, her pencil scratching against the yellowed paper. Miller got $12 for it. He owes us $11.60. "He's never going to pay, Sarah," I'd say, rubbing my aching shoulders. "He is," she'd reply, her eyes fixed on the numbers. "He thinks he's hoarding his wealth and that floorboard in the office. He thinks he's safe because we're just kids. But every day we work, the debt gets bigger. And one day, Sarah, the interest is going to be more than he can afford." We spent a decade in that yard, building a prison for a man who thought he was our jailer. We learned the sound of every floorboard in his house. We learned exactly when the local sheriff came by for his donation to look the other way. We learned that Miller wasn't just a mean old man, he was a criminal who was getting sloppy. And then, the day came when Miller made his biggest mistake. He got a shipment of special cars from across the border, high-end, stolen, and filled with something much more valuable than scrap metal. He thought he could use us to hide the evidence. He didn't realize he was handing us the keys to our freedom. In the middle of August, the heat in the yard becomes a living thing. It sits on your chest and tastes like rust and old rubber. That was the month the special shipment arrived. Usually, Miller brought in wrecks, cars that had been crumpled like soda cans. But this time, 3 black SUVs rolled in under the cover of a moonless Tuesday. They weren't wrecked, they were pristine, except for the bullet holes in the driver's side glass. Miller didn't sit on his porch that night. He stayed in the garage, pacing like a caged animal. He called us in at 2 a.m., his eyes bloodshot and his breath smelling of sour mash. "Strip 'em," he barked, pointing a shaking finger at the SUVs. "I want the VIN plates gone, the upholstery shredded, and every electronic component out, now. If there's a single scrap left by dawn, you'll find out how hungry the dogs really are." Sarah and I didn't say a word. We grabbed our tools and went to work. But as Sarah pulled back the leather lining in the trunk of the lead vehicle, she stopped. She looked at me, her face turning a shade of gray I'd never seen before. She reached into the frame and pulled out a brick-sized package wrapped in heavy plastic. It wasn't scrap metal, it wasn't copper, it was a shipment of high-grade narcotics, worth more than Miller's entire yard 10 times over. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the crickets. "This isn't just Miller being a thief, this is him being a dead man. If the people who own this find out he has it, or if the people he's hiding it from find out we've seen it." "We put it back," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We finish the job and we act like we saw nothing." "No," Sarah said, and for the first time in 12 years I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "We don't put it back, we move it. We've been keeping the account for a decade, Elias. This isn't just a discovery, this is the final payment." We worked through the night, but we weren't just stripping cars. We were repositioning the pieces of a trap. We hid the packages in the hollowed-out hull of an old school bus at the far end of the property, the one place the dogs couldn't reach. By dawn, the SUVs were unrecognizable piles of scrap. Miller came out, squinting in the light, satisfied that his secret was buried. He didn't check the scrap piles. He didn't look in the bus. He just handed us a loaf of stale bread and told us to get some sleep. He thought he was safe. He thought he'd used us one last time to save his own skin. He didn't realize that Sarah had spent the night not just moving the weight, but making a phone call from the burner phone he kept in his desk. The next 48 hours felt like a slow-motion car crash. Miller was jumpy. Every time a truck drove past on the highway, he'd reach for his shotgun. He was waiting for his buyers to arrive, waiting for the payday that would let him leave this dying town for good. He didn't notice that Sarah and I had stopped working. We were just waiting. "You think they're coming tonight?" I asked Sarah as we sat in the dirt behind the shack. "They're already here," she said, nodding toward the ridge. I saw the glint of binoculars in the scrub brush. It wasn't the police. The sheriff was in Miller's pocket, but the people who owned those black SUVs didn't care about local law. They wanted their property back, and they didn't do negotiations. At midnight, the yard went silent. Not even the crickets were making a sound. The first explosion didn't come from a gun. It came from the office. Sarah had rigged the old generator to blow the moment Miller flipped the master switch. The garage was bathed in a blinding orange light, and in the chaos, the shadows on the ridge began to move. Miller came screaming out of the house, firing his shotgun at nothing, his face twisted in a mask of pure terror. "You, Elias, Sarah, get the guns, defend the yard." We didn't move. We stood by the gate, the firelight reflecting in our eyes. "The debt is settled, Miller," Sarah shouted over the roar of the fire. "We told them where you put it. We told them you were trying to skim off the top. We told them you were planning to run." "You little rats." Miller lunged for us, but he was old and he was slow. Before he could reach us, 3 figures emerged from the smoke. They weren't ghosts. They were men with silencers and eyes like flint. They didn't even look at us. To them, we were just part of the scenery, the leftovers of a man who had outlived his usefulness. "Where is it?" one of the men asked, his voice like ice. "The bus," I said, pointing toward the back of the lot. "Everything is there, untouched. We were just the labor." The men moved past us, heading for the bus. Miller was on his knees now, sobbing, trying to explain, trying to plead for a life that he had spent destroying others. I took Sarah's hand. We didn't wait for the end. We didn't need to hear the final shots or see the yard burn to the ground. We walked out the front gate, past the keep out signs and the rusted fences, and we didn't look back. In Sarah's pocket was the ledger. It was finished. The ink was dry, and for the first time in our lives, the world wasn't a map of places we couldn't go. It was just a road, and we were finally the ones behind the wheel. The sound of the scrapyard burning was a low, rhythmic thrumming that followed us for miles. It wasn't until we reached the interstate, the great divide between the world we knew and the world that didn't know we existed, that I finally let go of Sarah's hand. My palm was sweaty and my heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my throat. "We can't stay on the main road," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the adrenaline that was currently vibrating through my muscles. She was already back to the numbers. "They have the packages, but they saw our faces. To men like that, a loose thread is just a witness waiting to be pulled." We weren't driving a luxury SUV. We were in a 2004 tan sedan I'd been piecing together in secret for 3 years, hidden under a tarp behind the heap of rusted washing machines. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a car, the engine from a wrecked police cruiser, the transmission from a farm truck, and a frame that had seen more salt than a winter road. But it was fast, and more importantly, it was anonymous. "Where are we going, Sarah?" I asked, squinting against the glare of a distant billboard. "East," she replied, "toward the coast. There's a city called Oakhaven. It's big enough to get lost in, but small enough that people still use cash for the things that matter. I've been tracking the shipping manifests for months. There's a salvage yard that doesn't ask for ID if you know the right parts to bring in." We drove in silence, the only sound the high-pitched whine of the tires on the asphalt. I looked at Sarah in the dim glow of the dashboard. She was clutching that old ledger to her chest like it was a holy relic. I realized then that we had spent our entire lives preparing for the escape, but we hadn't spent a single second thinking about the arrival. For 12 years, we were defined by what we were running from. Now, we were just 2 kids in a tan car with $60 in a glove box and a trunk full of stolen tools. We were ghosts, but the problem with being a ghost is that the world passes right through you. You have no shadow, you have no weight. We were free, but for the first time in my life, the weight of that freedom felt heavier than the chain Miller had kept us on. Oakhaven wasn't the paradise Sarah had imagined. It was a gray, towering maze of concrete and salt air, a place where the wind always smelled like wet iron and broken promises. We arrived as the sun was beginning to bleed through the fog, turning the skyline into a jagged row of broken teeth. We found a motel on the edge of the shipping district. The sign flickered with a dying neon hum, the Anchor. It was the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found or when they had nowhere else to go. The man behind the counter didn't look up from his newspaper. He had a face that looked like a crumpled mop and skin the color of old parchment. 30 a night, he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Cash up front, no guests after 10. I don't care what you do in the room as long as the walls stay standing." I handed him 30 of our $60. It felt like handing him a piece of my lung. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. There were 2 twin beds with covers so thin you could see the stains on the mattresses underneath. Sarah went straight to the window, pulling the heavy, dust-caked curtains shut. "We need new names, Elias," she said, her voice sharp. "We can't be the leftovers anymore. If we use our real names, the paper trail will find us. The bank accounts, the school records we don't have, the birth certificates Miller probably burned. It's all a tether." "I don't know any other names," I said, sitting heavily on the bed. My bones felt like lead. "Pick one," she commanded. "A name that sounds like it belongs to someone who has a father who worked in an office and a mother who baked pies. A name that sounds safe." I thought about it. I thought about the magazines I'd found in the cars we stripped. I thought about the names of the people who owned the shiny things. How about Miller? I joked, a bitter taste in my mouth. Sarah didn't laugh. She looked at me with an intensity that made me flinch. Never that name. Never again. We are the Wick family now. Short, simple, like a candle before it's lit. I'm Clara, you're Ben. Clara and Ben Wick, I repeated. It felt like wearing a suit that was 3 sizes too small. It didn't fit, and it made it hard to breathe. That night, as the sounds of the city roared outside our window, the sirens, the shouting, the relentless grinding of a world that didn't care if we lived or died, I realized the true cost of our freedom. We hadn't just left the scrapyard. We had left our identities. We were starting at zero in a world where everything had a price tag, and we were rapidly running out of currency. Sarah opened the ledger to a fresh page. She didn't write down copper prices this time. She wrote down our new names, over and over until the ink ran black. "The account isn't closed, Elias," she whispered into the dark. "It's just under new management." Living in Oak Haven as Ben Wick felt like learning a foreign language where I only knew the swear words. Every interaction was a risk. Every time a cop car rolled past the diner where we ate our one meal a day, I had to fight the urge to bolt. But hunger is a powerful teacher. By the end of our first week at the Anchor, we were down to our last $5. Sarah, now Clara, hadn't left the room in 3 days. She was staring at the city through a crack in the curtains, mapping the movements of the delivery trucks in the alleyway below. "I found a place," she said, not turning around. "It's a marine salvage yard on the North Docks. It's run by a man named Holloway. He doesn't take Wick or Vane or any other name. He takes work." I heard 2 guys at the laundromat talking about how he's falling behind on his scrap quotas because his hydraulic press keeps seizing up. I looked at my hands. The grease was gone, scrubbed away by a week of cheap soap, but the scars were still there. "I can fix a press," I said. It was the only truth I had left. The next morning, I walked 3 miles to the docks. Miller's made look like a playground. It was a massive, salt-crusted graveyard for ships, rusting hulls of tugboats and fishing trawlers that looked like beached whales. Holloway was a man who looked like he was made of driftwood, gray, weathered, and hard. He didn't even look up from his clipboard when I approached. "We ain't hiring," he snapped. "Move along, kid." "I can fix a press," I said, my voice steady. "Your bypass valve is clogged with salt and the piston seal is dry. You've been greasing the exterior, but the grit is inside the sleeve. Give me an hour and a wrench and I'll have it crushing at full pressure." Holloway stopped. He looked at me then, really looked at me. He saw the way I stood, the way I looked at the machinery instead of him. He saw the language of iron written all over me. "An hour," he grunted, tossing me a heavy adjustable wrench. "If you break it, I'm throwing you in the harbor. If you fix it, well, we'll see." I didn't need an hour. I needed 40 minutes. I worked with a feverish intensity, the familiar scent of oil and metal grounding me for the first time since the fire. When the press finally roared to life, the piston slamming down with enough force to shake the ground, Holloway actually smiled. It was a grim, toothless thing. 20 an hour, he said, off the books. You show up at 5, you leave at 6, you don't talk to the other guys, and you don't ask what's in the containers. You got a name, kid? Ben, I said. Ben Wick. All right, Ben, get to the sorting pile. We got a trawler coming in that needs to be stripped by Monday. I walked back to the motel that night with $80 in my pocket. I felt like a king. But as I opened the door to room 212, I saw Sarah sitting on the floor, the ledger open, her face pale in the flickering light of the TV. "We have a problem," she whispered. "The news. They found Miller, or what was left of him." The television was an old tube model, the picture snowy and distorted, but the image was clear enough. The scrapyard, our home, was a blackened skeleton. The reporter was standing in front of the gate,
The keep out sign melted into a twisted spiral. Authorities have identified the remains found in the garage as Arthur Miller, the reporter said, but the investigation has taken a turn. Police are searching for 2 associates who lived on the property, Elias and Sarah Vane. They are considered persons of interest in what is being described as a coordinated hit by a regional cartel. My heart went cold. Persons of interest, I repeated. They think we did it? Or they think we're dead? It doesn't matter what the police think, Clara said, her voice trembling. Look at the scroll at the bottom. I leaned in. Search continues for missing cargo valued at $4 million. The men from the yard, I whispered. They didn't get it all, or they want people to think they didn't. No, Clara said, standing up and pacing the small room. They got the drugs, Elias, but they didn't get the other ledger, the one Miller kept in his floorboard, the one with the names of every buyer, every crooked cop, and every drop-off point for the last 20 years. I looked at her, confused. What are you talking about? We didn't take that. I did, she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a second book, this one bound in black leather, thick and smelling of mildew. I grabbed it while the generator was blowing. I thought it was just more of his accounts, but it's not. It's a map of the entire operation. It's the reason those men came to the yard. They weren't just after the shipment. They were after the evidence. I stared at the black book like it was a live grenade. Sarah, Clara, we have to get rid of that. If they find out we have that, they won't just look for us. They'll hunt us to the end of the earth. We can't get rid of it, she said, her eyes turning hard, the scowl returning with a vengeance. It's our only leverage. As long as we have this, they can't kill us without losing everything. But as long as we have this, we can never stop running. She walked over to the TV and turned it off, plunging the room into a suffocating darkness. Miller didn't just leave us his debt, Elias. He left us his war. And now the men who killed him are going to realize that the leftovers are the only ones left who know where the bodies are buried. Outside, the rain started to fall, that same gray, oily rain from our childhood. But this time, we weren't hiding under a shipping container. We were sitting in a motel room with the keys to an empire in our laps, waiting for the first knock on the door.
For the next 3 days, the black leather ledger sat on the bedside table like a coiled snake. Neither of us wanted to touch it, yet neither of us could look away. Every time I came home from Holloway's yard, I half expected to see the door kicked in and Clara, gone. I spent my shifts at the docks in a trance. I was no longer just fixing machines. I was scanning every face, every black sedan that slowed down near the gates, every shadow that didn't move when the sun shifted. My hands were back to their old state, cracked, oil-stained, and shaking. "You're twitchy, kid," Holloway said on Thursday afternoon. He was leaning against a rusted bulkhead, chewing on a piece of tobacco. "Like a dog that knows a storm's coming. You in trouble?" "Just tired," I lied, tightening a bolt until my knuckles went white. "The world's full of tired people, Ben. Most of them are tired because they're carrying something too heavy for them. If you're carrying something you shouldn't be, my advice, drop it in the harbor before it drags you under." I didn't answer. I couldn't. When I got back to the anchor, the air in the room was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and old paper. Clara was sitting on the floor, the black ledger spread out in front of her. She had a pen in her hand and a look on her face that I hadn't seen since she was 6 years old. Pure, unadulterated terror mixed with a new, sharper resolve. "It's not just names, Elias," she whispered, not looking up. "It's bank account numbers. It's coordinates for caches buried in 3 different states. And it's a list of payments to a man named Detective Vane." I froze. "Our name? You think he's a relative?" "No," she said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I think Miller picked our name off a list of people he was paying off. We weren't just random orphans, Elias. We were a joke to him, a way to keep his favorite dirty cop's name in his mouth every time he yelled at us." The room felt like it was spinning. Our very identity, the thing we thought was ours, was just another piece of Miller's scrap. "Someone's outside," she suddenly hissed, reaching over to kill the light. I dropped to the floor, my heart slamming against the carpet. In the silence, I heard it. The slow, deliberate crunch of gravel outside our door, then the faint metallic click of the doorknob being tested. I didn't think, I acted. I grabbed the heavy wrench I'd brought home from Holloway and signaled for Clara to get behind the bed. The doorknob turned again. Whoever was out there wasn't using a key. They were using a pick. Click. The door swung open an inch. A sliver of hallway light cut across the room. I saw the silhouette of a man, tall, wearing a heavy overcoat, holding something small and dark in his hand. I didn't wait for him to step in. I lunged. I swung the wrench with everything I had. It hit his forearm with a sickening crack, and the gun, a silenced pistol, skittered across the linoleum. The man grunted, a low, professional sound, and lunged for my throat. He was stronger than me, trained in a way I wasn't, but I had 12 years of scrapyard rage behind my fists. We crashed into the TV stand, the old tube television exploding in a shower of glass and sparks. "Elias, get him!" Clara screams. She didn't stay behind the bed. She grabbed the heavy black ledger and swung it like a brick, catching the man across the temple. He staggered. That was my window. I kicked him in the chest, sending him sprawling into the hallway. I didn't stay to finish the fight. "The bag! Get the bag!" I roared. Clara grabbed our single backpack, stuffed with the ledgers and our few clothes, and we bolted for the back stairs. We didn't take the elevator. We didn't go for the front lobby. We scrambled down the rusted fire escape, the cold Oak Haven rain hitting us like a spray of needles. We reached the tan sedan just as a second car, a black SUV with tinted windows, screamed into the motel parking lot. "Go, go!" Clary yelled. I jammed the key into the ignition. The Frankenstein engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a sound like a wounded beast. I threw it into reverse, tires shrieking, and tore out of the lot just as the first man emerged from the motel, clutching his broken arm and pointing at us. We didn't stop until we were 10 miles outside the city, hidden in a dense grove of pine trees off a logging road. I killed the engine and the lights. The only sound was the rain hitting the roof and the heavy, ragged breathing of two people who had just realized their new life was dead. "They found us," I said, my voice shaking. "How did they find us so fast?" Clara reached into the backpack and pulled out the black ledger. She felt along the inside of the heavy leather spine. Her fingers stopped on a small, hard bump. She ripped the leather open. A small, blinking red light fell into her palm. A GPS tracker. "He didn't leave it to find us," Clara whispered, her face pale in the darkness. "Miller left it as bait. He knew that if he died, whoever took this book would lead the killers straight to them. We've been broadcasting our location since the moment we left the yard." I looked at the tracker. Then I looked at the dark road behind us. "They're coming, aren't they?" "Yes," she said. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked like the fire we'd left behind. "We aren't running. We're going to give them exactly what they want. We're going to give them the book, but we're going to give it to them at the one place they can't afford to be seen." "Where?" "The police station," she said. "We're going to find Detective Vane." We didn't drive straight to the precinct. We weren't that stupid. If Detective Vane was on Miller's payroll, the front desk was just another gate to a cell. Instead, we sat in that dark pine grove for 3 hours, watching the tracker blink in Clara's hand like a dying heartbeat. "He's going to kill us the moment he sees us, Clara," I said. "A dirty cop doesn't want witnesses. He wants the ledger and he wants the silence." "He wants the ledger more," she replied. Her voice had changed. It wasn't the voice of a scared kid anymore. It was the voice of a mechanic who had figured out how to rig a machine to explode. "This book isn't just a list of names. It's his retirement plan. If this goes to the feds, he's dead. If it stays with us, he's nervous. But if he gets it back, he can erase himself." She took the tracker and taped it to the underside of a heavy rock. Then we moved the car a mile down the road, hidden behind a collapsed barn. We waited. An hour later, a single set of headlights cut through the trees. A silver sedan, unmarked, professional.
slowed exactly where the tracker was. A man stepped out. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a tired, middle-aged man in a cheap windbreaker. "Detective Vane?" I called out from the shadows of the barn. He froze. He didn't reach for his gun, not yet. He just stood there, looking at the rock where the red light was blinking. "Elias, Sarah, I've been looking for you kids. You're in a lot of trouble." "We're in the kind of trouble you get paid to fix, Detective," I said, stepping into the light. I was holding the black ledger in one hand and a flare I'd taken from the car's emergency kit in the other. "We have the book. We know about the caches. We know about the donations Miller sent to your house every Christmas." Vane looked at the book. I saw the hunger in his eyes. It was the same look Miller had when he looked at a pile of copper. "Give it here," he said. His voice dropped an octave. "I can make the person of interest status go away. I can get you new IDs, real ones, not that WIC garbage you were using at the motel. New IDs and 50,000 in cash, in a bag, in a trunk of your car. Now," Clara said, stepping out from behind me. Vane chuckled, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "You've got a lot of nerve for two kids who smell like a scrapyard fire." "We have 12 years of nerve, Detective," I said, striking the flare. The phosphorus hissed to life, casting a violent red glow over the woods. I held it inches from the black leather. "The cache or the only evidence of your life's work becomes a pile of ash in 3 seconds.
Vane moved fast, but he underestimated how much we were willing to lose. He reached for his holster, but Clara didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She threw a heavy iron gear, one of the scraps she'd kept in the backpack, with the precision of someone who had spent a decade hitting targets in a yard. It caught him square in the chest. Vane stumbled back, gasping, and I didn't give him a chance to recover. I didn't use a gun. I used the weight of the sedan. I'd left the car in neutral on the slight incline of the barn floor. I kicked the block out from under the tire. The Frankenstein monster rolled forward, silent and heavy, pinning Vane against the door of his silver sedan before he could draw his weapon. It wasn't a kill shot, it was a trap. He was stuck, the air wheezing out of his lungs as the bumper of our tan car crushed into his side. "The keys," I demanded, leaning over him. He was shaking, his face pale in the dying red light of the flare. You can't. The cartel, they'll find you." "The cartel only knows what Miller told them," Clara said, kneeling down and taking the keys from his belt. "And Miller only knew what we wanted him to know at the end." She opened his trunk. There wasn't $50,000. There was something better. Inside the trunk were 2 evidence bags. One contained the missing $4 million in narcotics from the black SUVs. The other contained a stock of blank, high-security law enforcement credentials and a burner phone that was currently vibrating. "He wasn't coming to save us," Clara whispered, looking at the drugs. "He was going to kill us, take the ledger, and sell the shipment back to the cartel himself. He was the one who told them Miller was skimming." I looked at Vane. He was the one who had started the fire. He was the one who had traded our names for a paycheck 15 years ago. "We aren't taking the drugs," I said. "No," Clara agreed. "We're taking the credentials, and we're leaving the drugs with him." We pulled Vane out from between the cars. He was alive, but his legs were broken. We sat him against a tree and placed the narcotics on his lap. Then we took the black ledger and placed it right on top. "What are you doing?" Vane hissed, his eyes wide with terror. "They'll kill me. If they find me with this, they'll think I stole it from them." "Exactly," I said. Clara took the burner phone from the bag. She hit the redial button. When a voice on the other end answered with a cold "yeah," she only said 4 words. "The woods, logging road, Vane has it." She dropped the phone in the mud and we walked away. As we drove the tan sedan back toward the highway, I looked in the rearview mirror. I didn't see a detective. I didn't see a monster. I just saw a man sitting in the dark, surrounded by a fortune he couldn't spend and a debt he could never pay. The weight of the chain was finally gone. But as we hit the open road headed for a border we'd never seen, I looked at Clara. "Who are we now?" I asked. She looked at the empty seat where the ledger used to be. She looked at her clean hands. "Whoever we want to be," she said. "The account is settled." We drove until the trees changed. We drove until the gray, oily rain of the coast was replaced by the high, dry air of the mountains. The tan sedan, the Frankenstein car,
held together for exactly 412 miles before the transmission finally gave up the ghost in a small town outside the border. I steered it into a field of tall grass as it coasted to a silent stop. We didn't try to fix it. We didn't need to. This car had done the one thing it was built for. It had carried us out of a life that was meant to be our grave. We stood by the side of the road, the morning sun beginning to crest over the peaks. It was a different kind of light. It didn't feel like the glare of a security lamp or the orange flicker of a fire. It felt new. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of ash, the remains of the last few pages of Miller's ledger she'd burned at a gas station back in Oak Haven. She let the wind take them. "I checked the news on the burner phone before I smashed it," she said quietly. "Vane didn't make it to the hospital. And the cartel, well, they don't have a reason to look for 2 dead orphans anymore. As far as the world is concerned, Elias and Sarah Vane stayed in that fire." I looked at her. Her face was still sharp, her hands still scarred, but the tension in her jaw, the weight she'd been carrying since she was 7 years old, had finally snapped. "What do we do with the rest of the money?" I asked, looking at the small bag of cash we'd taken from Vane's emergency stash. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to buy a house with a real floor, enough to buy a life. "We invest it," she said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through. "In ourselves. I want to see a library, Elias, a real one, not a public one with time limits, but a place where I can read until the sun goes down and no one tells me I'm wasting time." "And you?" she asked. I looked at my hands. I thought about the engines I'd fixed, the machines I'd mastered, and the trap I'd built. I realized I didn't want to fix things that were broken anymore. I wanted to build things that were meant to last. "I think I'm going to build a house," I said. "Somewhere with a lot of windows. Somewhere where the doors don't need locks." We started walking toward the town. We didn't look back at the car. We didn't look back at the road. For the first time in our lives, the ledger was blank. There was no debt. There was no interest. There was just the next step. And for the first time, that was enough.
Elias and Sarah, Ben and Clara, they found what most people spend their whole lives looking for. Not a fortune and not a kingdom, just the right to own their own names. But their story makes you wonder, doesn't it? We all live in a system of some kind. We all have Millers in our lives, people or places that try to convince us that we owe them for the very air we breathe. People who try to tell us that our value is determined by how much we can produce for them. The question is, what is your breaking point? How long would you count the numbers in a hidden ledger before you decided it was time to collect? Before you head back to your own world, I want to hear from you. Was Elias right to leave Vane for the cartel, or did they become the very monsters they were trying to escape? Have you ever had to leave everything behind just to find out who you actually were? Scroll down and talk to me in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from and what this story brought up for you. Your stories are the reason this channel exists. If Elias and Sarah's journey hit home, hit the like button and subscribe to Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. Turn on those notifications. We have more ledgers to open and more accounts that are long overdue. My name is Elias, at least for tonight. Thank you for walking through the dirt with us. Keep your tools sharp and your ledgers honest. I'll see you in the next story.